the plight of concert and performance venues during the pandemic. Yes, I'll be talking to the Chief Executive of the Royal Albert Hall in just a moment. But first of all, let's remind you of some key stories here in the UK. England's Deputy... You're with BBC News. Let's remind you of the top stories this hour. Brexit negotiators from the EU and UK will... Music festivals, concert venues and theatres face financial ruin if current social distancing measures stay in place. That's the warning coming from key players in the industry. Andrew Lloyd Webber today will give evidence to the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee in a push to get further government help. Theatres across the country were able to reopen from the middle of August. That was as long as they had appropriate social distancing measures in place. Many argue, though, this is financially unviable. Well, let's discuss this with Craig Hassall, Chief Executive of the Royal Albert Hall. Craig, thank you so much for being on the programme. First of all, just tell us what you're doing at the Royal Albert Hall as you know, in the midst of the pandemic. How are you operating?
Well, we've been closed since March, Sally, so it's quite a difficult situation for us. We're hosting the Proms at the moment, but the Proms has no audience, so it's socially distanced, but it's not viable financially. So for us to open, we need to change the government guidelines. We need different guidelines for opening. What do you suggest? Well, I'm not a scientist and I'm not in the government, but I can just say that under the current guidelines, our capacity drops to about 37%. And for anyone to hire the Royal Albert Hall, the break-even is about 80%. So nobody can viably hire the Royal Albert Hall at the moment, and as a result, we remain closed. Also, it's not just those who are going to watch the performance, it's the performers as well, isn't it? I mean, the orchestras are huge and they're very close together, and your stage is the size that it is. I know there's various options and you move your stage around, but still. It's still a problem, and the Proms at the moment have about 500 performers in the Royal Albert Hall. As a result, there's no room for the audience under the current guidelines, and even then we're doing an awful lot with the BBC to make sure the performers and the crew are safe backstage. Yeah, there's so much to consider, but clearly we're not out of this pandemic yet. We've seen numbers going up in the last 2 days in terms of the number of people infected, and it looks like those who are infected are between, you know, the age of 17 and 30. That's where the spread is happening mostly, and they're the most likely to come and go to the theatre and performances, etc., aren't they, in many ways? Well, I guess we're lucky in that our age range goes from that age group to much, much older and everything in between. So we'd like to welcome back everybody from every age group, but we just can't viably open under the current guidelines. If the current guidelines remain in place for, you know, the short term at least, are you and others calling for more financial help from the government to just keep yourself and other theatres open? I mean, outside of London, more smaller theatres, they're really vulnerable, aren't they? Because they haven't got the profile like the Royal Albert Hall. Yes, that's true. We're all in the same boat, though, in that none of us can viably open under the current guidelines. We do need help from government right now. We're not used to having government support as the Royal Albert Hall, but we will need help from the government. We've seen nothing so far beyond the furlough scheme, which has been fantastic. The problem is for all of us, the furlough scheme will finish at the end of October. We have no clear guidance beyond that as to when and how we might open viably and safely. So we're approaching a very difficult time for the industry. And for artists themselves, they're completely out of work. They've been furloughed, as you say, but what support is for them when the furlough scheme comes to an end? Well, there are two problems. The first problem is the artists and freelancers and the supply companies that support our industry have had no work or no support or no income since March. The furlough scheme has helped employees of places like the Royal Albert Hall and theatres, but that scheme ends at the end of October, so it's going to be a very difficult time when that support ends. Craig Hassall, we appreciate your time so early this morning. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll keep a very close eye on what happens going forward, and also how Andrew Lloyd Webber gets on today when he's ahead of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport
committee. So that is a lot of the business stories that are leading here on BBC World News. And of course, we have a lot more ahead for you as we keep going. Let's have a quick look at financial markets. I'm not sure.
Andrew Lloyd Webber will today ask the government to do more to help the performing arts industry survive the impact of lockdown. Most theatres remain closed because current social distancing rules mean audiences would be too small to turn a profit. Nina is in Liverpool and can hopefully tell us more. And hopefully, Nina, the technicals will work for us this time. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. As I was saying earlier, before the gremlins got the better of us, I'm at the Everyman in Liverpool. Have a look at this picture of some of the actors who've trod the boards here. You can see there, can't you, Julie Walters, Bill Nighy, Matthew Kelly, some of the greats. And also we've got some footage here of the wonderful Pete Postlethwaite, who's also been on stage here. You know, local theatres are really important. They matter for those actors who start out here and come back, but also for local communities. And this theatre alone estimates already through the pandemic they've lost around £1 million. Now, since the 15th of August, theatres have been allowed to reopen, but have a look around. Imagine if there was 2 metre distancing between each seat here. Like many theatres across the country, they'd only be able to generate around a quarter of revenue. They need about 80% of bottoms on seats in order to make production sustainable. So at the weekend, the government said, look, we want things back to normal by Christmas, by panto season. And some of the measures that they might bring in are things like increased ventilation, maybe on-the-day testing if that's ready in time. But also something like, do you remember the Eat Out to Help Out scheme that's just wrapped up? So Seat Out to Help Out, where maybe they would subsidise seats and then the government would reimburse the theatre producers. So how hard has it been for people who work in the industry? Let's have a chat with Natasha, who's based locally, an independent theatre producer. How are you and how have things been since March?
Hiya. It's been really difficult, actually. Yeah. In March, I had quite a few different jobs lined up, and then they either got cancelled or put on pause. And I think the biggest concern was the lack of information we were getting from the government about when we could work again and when we could start to go into theatres. And freelancers make up about 80% of the creative industries. So that's a lot of people that don't know when they can make work again and essentially have to wait it out. And there's a lot of us that can't afford to do that. So it's just been really stressful, actually.
It's the not knowing, isn't it? I mean, the government would say, look, we brought in the furlough scheme, support grants for businesses, also for individuals. We've ploughed 1.5 billion into the arts. Are you seeing any of that?
A lot of people fall through the cracks of a lot of those things. So they don't get furlough or they don't get the SEISS. And that 1.57 billion from the government, as soon as that's gone to venues and heritage sites, that won't filter through to freelancers, so we're still waiting and we're still not really getting any money to help us.
And actually it'll be too late for some jobs because thousands have already gone, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's speculation about this Seat Out to Help Out scheme, so it would encourage people back into theatres, perhaps on Monday to Wednesdays. How much of a difference would that make, do you think?
Oh, it would be massive.
Yeah.
I think during the whole lockdown, people were relying on the arts to get them through. They were watching TV, watching films, watching online theatre shows. So it's a chance to give back to the creative arts and have people come support these freelancers who've been sitting around waiting to work again. So I think it'd make a huge, huge difference.
The team here was saying earlier that lots of the regulars have still wanted to financially support because it's such a key part of the community, and that's the case across the country, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been amazing. The support from locals who love this theatre or love the local organisations that make work here has been brilliant. And I think if there can be encourage people who are a bit nervous about going outdoors again or going to the theatre, if it can encourage more people to come in, it'd be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of it is about confidence, isn't
Yeah,
it? Thank
definitely.
you, Natasha, and good luck for the months ahead. We'll chat to you a little bit later on. So when you think about it, it is about confidence. It is about getting people back inside, but there's no real meat on the bones of this plan to get people back into theatre. We know that later Cameron McIntosh, Andrew Lloyd Webber will be giving evidence to the government about why this matters. Just numbers, 300,000 jobs depend on theatre.
Thank you very much. We did hear we're having a few technical issues. We put it out there. Thank you so much, Nina, though.
Microphones. Never mind, we'll get there in the end, I'm sure. It's approaching 7:15. It's Tuesday morning now. Raising one child who represents their